Hey warriors, a 94-year-old man sits on a porch in Sicily, music, watching his grandson mow a lawn he will never see finished growing back. He isn't sad. He isn't scrolling through regrets. He built a stone wall on that property 40 years ago and it's still standing and he knows exactly why. He never once mistook motion for progress. Every hour of his life had a target. Every year he could name what it built. Most people reach 94 with a mountain of hours behind them and nothing to point to. He reached it with a wall, a business, 3 sons who don't flinch when life gets hard, and a silence in his chest that most men chase for decades and never catch. That silence is not luck. Music, it's arithmetic. It's what happens when a person stops leaking time into places that don't pay it back. You are leaking time right now. Not in some abstract poetic way, in a literal countable way. Somewhere in your day there is a crack in the floor and hours are falling through it and you've gotten so used to the sound of them falling that you no longer hear it. The Stoics built their entire philosophy around sealing that crack. Not through positivity, not through hacks, through brutal unsentimental truth-telling about where time actually goes and why. What follows are 7 of those truths pulled from 7 different men who each stared at the same problem from a different angle and arrived at the same conclusion. The man who wastes time, music, is not unlucky. He is untrained. Read these as instructions, not inspiration. If you're ready to stop leaking time and start building, music, comment this below before we go any further. I build today. Truth 1, you do not have tomorrow. You have never had tomorrow. Seneca ran the finances of an empire and still found himself furious at how his fellow Romans treated their own lives. He watched senators guard their villas with armed men and their fortunes with lawyers and then hand out their days for free to anyone who asked. He said the strange thing wasn't that they wasted time, it's that they didn't even notice they were doing it because time doesn't announce its departure the way money does. Seneca wrote, "People are frugal with their possessions, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy." Sit with the imbalance in that sentence. A man will argue for 10 minutes over the price of bread and then burn 3 hours he'll never get back on a screen that gave him nothing. He'll lock his front door twice and leave his calendar wide open to anyone who wants a piece of it. This isn't a character flaw unique to Roman senators. It's the default setting of the human animal and it hasn't updated in 2,000 years. Here's the mechanism. Money loss is visible. A number goes down and something in your gut reacts. Music, time loss is invisible until it isn't. Until you're 46 and realize the skill you meant to learn at 26 never got learned. The book never got written, the body never got built, and there is no receipt to show you where the hours went. You can't audit them. They're gone the way breath is gone, replaced instantly by new breath so you never feel the absence. This is why tomorrow is the most dangerous word in your vocabulary. Not because tomorrow won't come, usually it does, but because the promise of it lets you off the hook today. You tell yourself you'll start the business next month, call your music father next week, fix your health after this next deadline. Each delay costs nothing in the moment, which is exactly the trick. The cost is deferred until it compounds into a life spent in the waiting room. Marcus Aurelius, ruling from horseback in the middle of plague and war, wrote to himself that a man should act, speak, music, and think as if he might depart from life this very moment. He didn't write that to scare himself. He wrote, music, it because the emperor of Rome, with more resources than any human alive, still only had access to one currency that mattered, and it wasn't gold. You already know this intellectually. Everybody does. What separates the man who acts on it from the man who nods and closes the video is a single decision: to treat every remaining day like the only asset you actually own, because it is. There's a version of this truth that goes deeper than the obvious warning about mortality, and it's the version Seneca actually spent most of his writing on. It isn't just that you might die tomorrow. It's that even if you live another 50 years, most of those years will be consumed by things that were never yours to begin with. Sleep takes a third. Obligation, bureaucracy, and other people's emergencies take another chunk you never agreed to hand over. Music, illness, grief, and the slow erosion of energy that comes with age take more still. By the time you subtract everything that isn't truly discretionary, the actual usable years, the ones where you have both the health and the freedom to build something, are a fraction of the number printed on a birth certificate. Seneca's real argument wasn't you might die soon. It was you have far less than you think, even in the best case scenario, and almost no one budgets their ambitions against that smaller, honest number. This is why the trap of tomorrow is so much more expensive than it looks. It's not one day lost. It's a pattern that repeated for a decade quietly consumes the entire discretionary portion of a life while the person living it assumes they're still in the warm-up phase. The senator in Seneca's letters wasn't lazy. He was busy every day of his life. He simply never noticed that busy and spent are not the same, music, word. And by the time he did notice, there was no year left to spend correctly. If this hits something in you, comment the word below. Music, let it be the last time you need reminding. I built now. Truth 2. Busy is not the same as building. Epictetus was born a slave. He understood, music, better than any philosopher who came after him, that a man can be in chains and still be free. And a man can be free and still be enslaved. Enslaved to his own noise. He spent his life teaching Roman aristocrats, men with every comfort available to them, and he watched most of them fill their days with activity that led nowhere. He said, "It is not death or hardship that is a fearful thing, but the music, fear of death or hardship." Turn that lens on wasted time and you find the same trap wearing a different mask. Most people aren't afraid of failure directly. Music, they're afraid of the moment right before failure. The vulnerable stretch where you commit to something and it might not work. So, instead of committing, they generate motion. Motion feels like music, courage because it's tiring and it fills the hours. But motion without a target is just music, fear wearing a business suit. Look at how this shows up. A man spends 4 hours researching the business he wants to start, watching videos about other people who already built music, theirs. He tells himself this is preparation. It's avoidance dressed as diligence. A woman rewrites the same paragraph of her book 9 times calling it perfectionism when the truth is that an unfinished draft can't be rejected and a finished one can. Music, the rewriting is a hiding place with good lighting. Epictetus drew a hard line between what is in your control and what isn't, and he insisted that peace only comes from obsessing over the first category and ignoring the second. Wasted time almost always happens in that second category. Music, worrying about outcomes you can't control instead of executing the actions you can. Music, you cannot control whether the business succeeds. You can control whether you send the email today. The man who confuses these two spends his whole life managing anxiety about outcomes and never gets around to the inputs that actually move him. Music, this is the second brutal truth. Your calendar can be completely music, full, and your life can still be completely empty because being occupied and being directed are not the same discipline. One exhausts you. The other builds something that outlives the exhaustion. Ask yourself tonight what you did today that you could point to in 5 years. Not what you were busy with, what you built. If the honest answer is nothing, you already know which category consumed your day. Epictetus taught his students a specific exercise for catching this trap in real time, and it still works exactly as designed. Before starting any task, ask what the task is actually for. Not what it looks like, not how it will be perceived, but what concrete change it produces in the world once it's finished. Research that never leads to a decision isn't preparation. It's a loop with no exit. A draft that never gets submitted isn't perfectionism. It's a hiding place with extra steps. The exercise is uncomfortable because it strips away every excuse, music, that motion normally hides behind. Most people run through this filter honestly, discover that less than half of what fills their day would survive the question, what is this actually building? The rest, music, is noise wearing the costume of effort. The deeper trap Epictetus identified is that motion is self-rewarding in a way that real building often isn't, at least at first. Watching 10 videos about starting a business releases the same low hum of accomplishment as actually starting, music, one without any of the risk. This is precisely why so many intelligent, capable people stay stuck for years in a holding pattern that feels productive from the inside. The feeling is real, the music output isn't, and a life spent chasing the feeling instead of the output, music, is a life that will look from a distance exactly like busyness and nothing like a body of work. Comment this one if you've caught yourself confusing motion for progress. I build direction. Truth 3, comfort is alone with brutal interest. Cleanthes worked nights hauling water so he could study philosophy by day under Zeno, and he did this for years while wealthier students mocked him for it. He wasn't chasing comfort. Music, he understood something the comfortable men around him didn't. Every hour you spend avoiding difficulty today gets billed back to you later with interest in a currency far more expensive than the discomfort you dodged. Cleanthes is remembered for insisting that the willing are led by fate, while the unwilling are dragged. Apply that to your own resistance. The task you're avoiding, the hard conversation, the workout, the cold outreach, the confrontation with your own finances, doesn't disappear because you avoid it. It waits. And while it waits, it grows, because problems left untouched rarely stay the same size. The difficult conversation you postponed for 6 months isn't the same conversation 6 months later. It's heavier, because resentment has had time to compound on both sides. This is the quiet arithmetic behind procrastination that almost nobody says out loud. Delay isn't, music, neutral. It's not a pause button. It's a loan, and the interest rate is whatever emotional and practical cost accumulates while you wait. The gym membership you don't use still charges your card. The skill you, music, don't practice still gets rustier in your hands. The relationship you don't repair still cools in the silence you left it in. Compare two men doing the same unpleasant task, say an honest look at their spending. One does it the first week of the problem, when it's a 15-minute conversation with a spreadsheet. Music, the other avoids it for 3 years, until it's a crisis requiring lawyers or family intervention or a bankruptcy filing. Same task, wildly, music, different cost. The only variable was how long the loan of avoidance was allowed to accrue interest. Music, Cleanthes chose the water hauling nights because he understood that discomfort accepted early is cheap, music, and comfort purchased today is paid for later at a markup you can't negotiate. Music, this is why Stoic training so often looks from the outside like people choosing hardship for no reason. Cold showers, hard conversations, blunt honesty. Music, they aren't masochists. They're paying down debt before the interest sets in. Look at your own life and find the loan you're currently taking out. The unopened, music, bill, the unresolved conflict, the unstarted project. Every day you don't touch it, the interest ticks up quietly, and you won't feel the full weight of it until the day it's due. What makes this particularly brutal is that the interest rate is rarely fixed. It's compounding, and it compounds fastest in exactly the domains people avoid the longest. A body neglected for a year needs a year of correction. Music, a body neglected for a decade often needs medical intervention that a year of neglect never would have required. A conversation avoided for a week is awkward. The same conversation avoided for 3 years has usually calcified into a grudge that neither party fully remembers the origin of, only the resentment. Cleanthes hauled water at night specifically because he'd done the arithmetic on this. The discomfort of studying while exhausted was fixed and bounded, while the discomfort of staying uneducated and poor for the rest of his life was neither fixed nor bounded. He wasn't choosing suffering for its own sake. Music, he was choosing the cheaper loan. There's a second layer to this most people miss entirely. Avoidance doesn't just delay the cost. It usually adds a second cost on top of the original one, the cost of having lived in the meantime with the low-grade anxiety of knowing the thing is still out there, unresolved. That, music, background hum of I still need to deal with that is itself a tax paid daily on top of whatever the reckoning will cost. People rarely count this tax, music, because it doesn't arrive as a single bill. It arrives as a slightly worse version of every single day until the debt gets paid. If you know exactly which loan I'm describing right now, comment it below. I pay now. Truth 4, your attention is the only property you actually own. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire on earth and still understood with total clarity that none of it belonged to him in any lasting sense. Not the throne, not the armies, music, not even his own body, which would fail and return to the earth regardless of his rank. The only thing he could claim as truly his, the only thing that was his to direct, protect, or squander was where he pointed his attention in any given moment. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not, music, outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Most people live as though the opposite is true. They act as though their attention belongs to whoever asks for it loudest, the notification, the argument, the stranger's opinion, the algorithm engineered by people who are paid based on how many hours of your one life they can extract. Every ping you answer without deciding to is a small transfer of ownership. You didn't choose to give that attention away, it was simply taken because you left the door unlocked. This is the least visible form of wasted time and the most expensive. You can lose an afternoon to a task you chose badly and still have made a decision. You lose something worse when you never decided at all, when the day simply happened to you, pulled in a dozen directions by forces that have no stake in your life beyond the seconds they can extract from it. Marcus understood that an empire is easier to defend than a mind because an empire has walls and a mind does not build its own unless you build them deliberately. He guarded his attention the way a general guards a border because he knew that a man who cannot control what he thinks about cannot control what he does, and a man who cannot control what he does is not in any meaningful sense free regardless of the title in front of his name. Here is the music test. At the end of today, will you be able to say where your attention went and why? Or will you only be able to say what happened to you? One of those is ownership, the other is trespassing on your own life. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private journal, the collection now known to the world, almost entirely as a series of reminders to himself about this exact music, because he understood something uncomfortable about power. Rank does not grant self-command. It only raises the number of people trying to steal your attention for their own ends. As emperor, music, he had generals who wanted his attention on war, senators who wanted it on politics, and a household that wanted it on ceremony, and every single one of them believed their claim was the most urgent. If the emperor of Rome had to fight daily to keep his own mind from being colonized by other people's priorities, the idea that an ordinary person could protect their attention passively without training, without a daily practice of reclaiming it, is close to fantasy. This is why he treated his journal as maintenance rather than reflection. Music, not a diary of feelings, but a toolkit he sharpened every morning so that when the day's demands arrived, he already knew which of them deserved his mind and which was simply loud. The people who waste the most attention today are rarely the ones under the least pressure. They're often the ones under the most because pressure is exactly what makes a mind vulnerable to whatever shows up first and shouts the loudest rather than what actually matters most. Comment below if you're done letting your attention be taken instead of given. Music, I own this. Truth 5, discipline practiced in public, music, is not the discipline that counts. Musonius Rufus taught that philosophy without daily practice was worthless decoration. Words a man wears to look impressive rather than a structure he actually lives inside. He pushed his students toward an uncomfortable question. Does your discipline exist when no one is watching, or does it only appear on the days an audience might notice? He said, if you accomplish something good with hard work, the labor passes quickly, but the good endures. If you do something shameful in pursuit of pleasure, the pleasure passes quickly, but the shame endures. Most wasted time hides exactly where no one is looking. The workout you skip when your trainer isn't watching. The extra hour of sleep you steal instead of the deep work you, music, promised yourself in a room with no witnesses to hold you accountable. Public music discipline is easy because it's really just performance, and performance is cheap when the audience is what you're optimizing for. Private discipline, the version that happens in an empty room at 6 o'clock in the morning with nobody to post it to, music, is the only version that actually compounds into a life. This is why so many people can look impressive from the outside and still feel hollow on the inside. They've built a discipline that only exists under observation. The moment the observation stops, so does the behavior, and the gap between the public image and the private reality becomes the exact size of the time they've wasted maintaining an illusion instead of building a life. Musonius Rufus lived this test, music, personally. He was exiled more than once for refusing to soften his teaching to please men in power, and in exile, stripped of audience, stripped of status, his habits didn't change. That consistency was the entire proof of his philosophy. Music, a man's real discipline is whatever remains once every spectator has left the room. Ask yourself honestly, if no one could ever find out what you did today, music, would you have done the same things?